The helicopter's blades faded into the distance, leaving behind nothing but silence and the brutal whisper of wind cutting through the Alaskan wilderness. Marcus Chen stood alone outside the weathered cabin, his breath crystallizing instantly in air so cold it burned his lungs with each inhale. The thermometer on the cabin's exterior read 58 degrees 6, and it was dropping. He'd volunteered for this. That thought repeated in his mind like a mantra as he surveyed his surroundings. The documentary crew had departed hours ago, their cameras capturing his confident smile and final wave. 72 hours, the producer had said, alone in one of Earth's most extreme environments. No communication, no outside help. Just you, the cabin, and whatever you can find inside. Marcus adjusted his thermal gear and pushed open the cabin door. The interior was marginally warmer but hardly welcoming. A single room with a wooden stove in the corner, a cot with a thin mattress, shelves lined with mysterious items covered in dust, and a small window facing the endless white expanse of the mountain. His first priority was fire. The stove dominated the room, and beside it sat a pile of split wood, enough for perhaps 3 days if he rationed carefully. He'd trained for this moment through countless survival courses, documentaries, and outdoor expeditions. Theory and practice, however, were about to become uncomfortably intimate. The matches were in a waterproof container on the shelf, alongside other supplies. As Marcus examined the cabin's contents, he felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. Water wasn't a problem. Clean snow surrounded the cabin. Food was minimal. A few cans of beans, some powdered soup, energy bars, and a jar of peanut butter. Not luxurious, but survivable. He arranged kindling in the stove with methodical precision, struck a match, and watched as the small flame caught the dry wood. Smoke curled upward, disappearing through the chimney. The fire caught properly, spreading to the larger logs with satisfying crackling sounds. Within minutes, heat began radiating into the room. Not comfort, but significant enough to make survival possible. Marcus checked his watch. 3:47 p.m. Darkness would come early in this season, around 4:30 p.m. He had roughly 40 minutes to prepare for the night. Outside, the wind was intensifying, carrying snow that pelted against the cabin's weathered walls with increasing violence. The storm the meteorologists had predicted was arriving ahead of schedule. He inventoried everything methodically. The cabin had no electricity, no running water, no modern conveniences whatsoever. But it had what mattered: structure, insulation, and a heat source. He'd slept in worse conditions during training exercises in the Canadian Rockies. This was simply more extreme. The cot needed padding. Marcus found a stack of blankets in a storage chest, old but functional. He layered them on the cot, creating insulation between himself and the cold metal frame. He gathered extra blankets, preparing to cocoon himself through the night. His thermal suit was rated for 40 degrees Celsius. Below that, layering and preparation were everything. As darkness descended, Marcus lit the oil lamp he'd found on a shelf. Its warm glow transformed the cabin from merely functional to almost welcoming. He boiled snow in a metal pot on top of the stove, creating hot water for instant soup. The warmth of the cup in his hands was almost as comforting as the meal itself. By 6 p.m., Marcus had completed his preparations. The stove was loaded with wood. His sleeping area was as prepared as circumstances allowed. He'd rationed his food carefully: soup, half an energy bar, and a small portion of beans heated in a can. His water container was full of melted snow. Then came the waiting. The wind outside grew teeth. It howled around the cabin's corners, testing every seam and gap in the structure. Snow accumulated against the western wall, creating drifts that climbed halfway up the window. Inside, Marcus maintained the fire carefully, adding logs every 30 minutes to maintain consistent heat. The temperature inside the cabin hovered around 5 degrees Celsius, freezing by normal standards, survivable only with proper insulation and protective clothing. Marcus remained in his thermal suit, layers of wool beneath it, all covered by a heavy insulated parka. His hands were gloved, his feet in thermal boots lined with wool socks. As night deepened into the kind of darkness that only exists in remote wilderness, Marcus sat on the edge of his cot and truly confronted the magnitude of what he'd undertaken. The wind's roar created a disorienting symphony, loud enough to make communication with oneself difficult. The cabin creaked and groaned with each gust, wood expanding and contracting under temperature extremes. He thought of the camera crew's departure, of the world beyond this cabin, existing in heated buildings and electric light. He thought of his family watching the documentary months from now, seeing him at this moment through edited footage that would compress 72 hours into 40 minutes of entertainment. But right now, entertainment was irrelevant. Survival was the only narrative that mattered. Marcus checked the thermometer through the window, 59 degrees C and still dropping. The first night stretched ahead of him, and despite his preparation and training, a small voice in the back of his mind whispered an honest truth. This was going to test him in ways he hadn't fully anticipated. He added more wood to the stove and settled into his nest of blankets, listening to the wind demand everything the cabin had to offer and everything he had to give. Midnight arrived like an unwelcome visitor, and with it came a new problem Marcus hadn't anticipated. The cold was becoming psychological. His body remained protected, the cabin's interior maintaining that fragile 5 degrees Celsius through careful fire management. But the mind was another matter entirely. The wind's constant assault created a background noise so pervasive that silence became impossible to remember. It was as though the world outside had become pure, undiluted hostility. Marcus had dozed intermittently, never truly sleeping. Each time he began to drift, a particularly violent gust would wake him, jolting him from half-dreams where he stood in the snow, exposed and freezing. The nightmares were worse than wakefulness. He rose from the cot at 1:15 a.m., his back stiff from the thin mattress and the cold that still permeated everything. The fire needed feeding. The thermometer outside read 61 degrees C, colder than the previous check. His carefully rationed woodpile was diminishing faster than he'd calculated. This realization brought the first genuine spike of concern. Marcus did the mathematics in his head, running through the calculations multiple times to ensure accuracy. At his current consumption rate, the wood would last perhaps 2 more days, possibly less if the temperature continued dropping and he needed the stove burning continuously. He'd planned for 72 hours, but survival mathematics operated on margins, and his margins were tightening. He needed to be smarter about fire management. Lethal cold didn't announce itself dramatically. It crept in gradually, stealing heat imperceptibly until a person simply stopped functioning. But allowing the fire to die completely wasn't acceptable either. The cabin's insulation helped, but 60 degrees C would eventually penetrate any defense if given enough time. Marcus made a decision. He would operate the stove on a rhythm, intense heat for 2 hours, then smaller fires for 1 hour, then repeat. It would require him to stay awake, managing the cycles throughout the night, but it would conserve wood while maintaining livability. He implemented the system immediately. The fire burned hot, and Marcus sat beside it, watching the flames through the stove's small window. His mind, denied sleep and forced to focus on immediate survival, began traveling strange paths. He thought about why people chose to test themselves this way. The documentary contract had been substantial, enough to fund his research in environmental science for 2 years. But beyond the financial incentive, there was something deeper. The desire to touch the edge of human capability and return to tell the story. It was primal, ancient even. Hunters returning from dangerous expeditions, explorers recounting polar voyages, adventurers describing near-death experiences. But the stories always felt cleaner in retrospect, shaped by time and the comfort of survival into narratives of triumph. The reality was messier, Cold, fear, uncertainty, and the constant background awareness that mistakes had immediate, irreversible consequences. By 3 a.m., Marcus was fighting exhaustion with everything he had. The rhythm of fire management helped, giving his mind a task to focus on, but the accumulated sleep deprivation was accumulating. His reactions slowed. His thoughts became circular. He forced himself to move. He walked the cabin's perimeter, checking walls for drafts, sealing small gaps with cloth he found in a storage area. The physical activity generated warmth and kept him alert. He did stretching exercises, performed push-ups on the cabin floor until his arms burned, anything to maintain circulation and consciousness. The wind reached a crescendo around 4 a.m. It sounded like something alive and angry, throwing its full weight against the cabin's eastern wall. The wooden structure groaned in protest, and for the first time, Marcus genuinely wondered about the building's structural integrity. He investigated the wall carefully, placing his hand against the wood, feeling for movement. The cabin flexed slightly with the wind's gusts. Not dangerously, but enough to confirm that he was inside something organic and reactive, not a structure of absolute stability. This was fine, he told himself. Cabins were designed for these conditions. The builders had understood the environment. The design would hold. But understanding something intellectually and believing it emotionally when wind threatened to unmake your shelter were two different experiences. By 5 a.m., the sky showed the first hints of lightning. The darkness began shifting from absolute black to deep gray. Marcus felt something shift within himself, a small victory, psychological more than physical. 1 night survived, 2 more to go. He prepared hot soup, melting snow and adding powder to create warmth in liquid form. The steam rising from the cup condensed on his face, and he realized his beard was partially frozen from his own breath. The image was surreal. Himself as an ice sculpture inhabiting a cabin at the top of the world. The first sunrise would arrive around 10 a.m. Marcus could wait that long. The night's worst was behind him. He checked the woodpile again. Slightly less than half remained. The mathematics would be tighter than he'd hoped, but manageable if he remained disciplined. Marcus added logs to the fire and returned to his observation post at the window, watching the grey sky gradually brighten, waiting for the day to finally arrive and bring its temporary reprieve from the endless night. Dawn arrived, not with light, but with revelation. The blizzard had become something more aggressive overnight. Snow pressed against the cabin's windows in drifts that climbed higher with each passing hour. What had been falling snow yesterday had transformed into a genuine whiteout, visibility reduced to perhaps 5 meters beyond the cabin's walls. The wind's velocity had intensified to the point where it created a constant, bone-deep hum that vibrated through the structure. Marcus checked the thermometer, 62°C. The cold had become almost incomprehensible, existing as an abstract concept rather than a physical reality he could fully process. At these temperatures, exposed skin would frost in seconds. Breath would crystallize before reaching full depth into the lungs. Exposed metal would become a hazard, capable of searing flesh instantly. But inside the cabin, with careful management, survival remained possible. The challenge was that his calculations had assumed relatively stable conditions. The intensifying storm was consuming heat faster than predicted. The woodpile that should have lasted 2 more days might only last 36 more hours. Marcus sat on the cot and confronted the central problem of survival at environmental extremes, the equation of available resources versus required consumption. He had enough food. Water wasn't a problem. Snow surrounded the cabin infinitely. But warmth was finite, rationed, measurable in logs that decreased with each hour. He needed to make a decision about the next 72 hours, reduce his heat consumption even further, accepting greater cold in the cabin, or accept that he might run out of wood before rescue arrived. The documentary crew had been scheduled to return in 72 hours precisely. but scheduled, assumed weather cooperated. If the storm continued, if visibility prevented helicopter flights, the timeline could extend. How many days could he maintain himself on half a cabin's worth of wood? Marcus forced himself away from catastrophic thinking. He focused on what he could control: current fire management, food rationing, physical maintenance. Worry was a luxury that consumed energy without producing results. He decided to implement severe rationing. The stove would run continuously, but at minimal levels, enough to keep the cabin's interior from dropping below 5 degrees C, but nothing more. It would be uncomfortable. His breath would fog constantly. Condensation would freeze on the walls, but it would extend his resources. He removed his outer parka and hung it near the stove to dry. The thermal suit beneath provided sufficient insulation for the cabin's temperature. This small change would reduce one layer of complexity. Wet insulation was worthless insulation. The morning passed in careful management. Marcus maintained the stove using just enough wood to sustain minimum temperature. He melted snow in small batches, rationing hot water between drinking and maintaining body heat through warm containers held in his hands. By midday, fatigue had become his primary adversary. He'd been awake for approximately 36 hours, managing fire cycles, fighting cold, maintaining alertness. His body demanded sleep with increasing desperation. Marcus knew this was dangerous. Hypothermia often began with sleep, the body's metabolic rate dropping, consciousness fading, warmth leaking away unnoticed. But he also knew that sleep deprivation itself became lethal after long enough. He compromised, scheduled sleep in 1-hour increments, with an alarm he created from a metal pot and spoon. Each hour, the alarm would wake him. He checked the fire, ensure the cabin's temperature hadn't dropped critically, then returned to sleep. It wasn't ideal, but it was sustainable. His first scheduled sleep began at 1 p.m. Marcus burrowed into his blanket cocoon, the pot and spoon alarm positioned where he'd hear it clearly. His body surrendered to exhaustion almost immediately. The hour passed in what felt like seconds. The alarm clanged, jarring him from dreams where he stood in warm sunlight, feeling heat on his skin. The contrast to the cabin's cold was disorienting. It took him several minutes to fully reorient himself. He rose stiffly, checked the stove, still adequate heat, the logs burning slowly but steadily, then reset the alarm and returned to sleep. The cycle repeated through the afternoon and into the evening. Wake, check fire, reset alarm, sleep. The routine became meditative, a rhythm that occupied his mind sufficiently to prevent spiraling into worry while allowing his body essential recovery. Afternoon gave way to darkness. The blizzard showed no signs of diminishing. If anything, it had intensified further, the wind producing sounds that seemed almost supernatural in their intensity, as though the mountain itself had become vocal and was expressing its hostility in a language of ice and desperation. Marcus moved through his evening routine with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd done it a dozen times. He ate beans heated in a can. He drank hot water with a bouillon cube. He checked the thermometer, 63 degrees C and dropping. The second night approached with a familiarity born of repetition. He'd survived the first. He would survive this one. And tomorrow, if his calculations held, the storm might begin diminishing. The rescue helicopter might arrive. He didn't allow himself to imagine what happened if it didn't. Instead, Marcus set the alarm, climbed into his blankets and closed his eyes, listening to the wind's assault on the cabin continue its patient work of testing everything he had to offer. By the morning of the third day, Marcus had stopped thinking about rescue and started thinking about ratios. The wood pile was noticeably reduced, perhaps 3/4 consumed. His calculations suggested approximately 18 hours of warmth remaining at current consumption rates. The documentary crew's scheduled arrival was in approximately 36 hours. The mathematics were unambiguous. He would run out of heat before rescue arrived, assuming the storm delayed them at all. He'd stopped sleeping in scheduled increments and shifted to whatever rest he could capture between fire management sessions. His mind had become crystalline in its focus, stripped of non-essential processing to concentrate entirely on survival mathematics. The cabin's interior temperature had dropped to 8 degrees C. His breath created constant clouds of vapor. Frost covered the interior walls, creating abstract patterns that would have been beautiful in different circumstances. His fingers had developed a slight tremor from the cold, not serious but noticeable. Marcus moved methodically through his morning routine. He examined his feet carefully, a necessity at extreme cold where frostbite could develop without obvious symptoms. His toes were pale but responsive, showing no concerning discoloration. His fingers similarly remained functional despite the cold. Physical assessment complete, he addressed the central problem. He needed to discover alternative heat sources. The cabin contained various objects accumulated over years: tools, spare parts, old cans, cloth, metal items whose original purposes were unclear. Marcus examined everything with intense scrutiny, looking for anything that might produce warmth. He found an old lamp, but it was empty of fuel. He discovered metal cans that might contain anything from paint to heating oil, impossible to determine without opening. He found cloth that might be useful for insulation or fire starting. And then he found the old cabin's previous resident's journal, stored in a wooden box beneath the cot. The entries spanned 15 years, written by a ranger named Thomas Garrett, who'd maintained the cabin during warmer seasons. Most entries were routine: weather observations, supply inventory, maintenance notes, but in the February section of one year, written in increasingly desperate handwriting, were entries from someone facing exactly Marcus's situation. Day 1 of blizzard. Wood supplies adequate, confidence high. Day 3 of blizzard, storm hasn't diminished, calculating wood consumption, numbers concern me. Day 5 of blizzard, roof began leaking from accumulated snow weight, made repairs. Found dry wood in back storage I'd forgotten about. This discovery may have saved my life. Marcus's hands trembled as he read. Back storage. He examined the cabin more carefully, following Garrett's years-old notes as a guide. Behind the cabin, accessible through a hatch he'd overlooked entirely, was a storage area, a crawl space beneath the floorboards where previous supplies had been cached. Marcus forced the hatch open, despite the cold that blasted upward like an open freezer. Using a flashlight, he peered into the darkness and felt something that might have been hope. Firewood. A substantial stack of it, split and protected from snow by the cabin's overhang. Enough to last perhaps another week. He pulled the wood inside in careful batches, constructing a new pile beside the stove. His hands became numb despite heavy gloves, working with mechanical precision to transfer each log. When the final log rested in his new supply pile, Marcus felt something crack open inside him, not quite crying, but close to it. The calculation had changed fundamentally. He now had resources extending beyond the expected rescue window. The timeline was no longer a countdown to crisis. He loaded the stove aggressively, allowing the temperature to climb to a genuinely comfortable level for the first time since arriving. He prepared hot food, soup, beans, and the small remaining portion of peanut butter mixed with melted snow into something resembling sweetness. As warmth returned to the cabin, something shifted in Marcus's mental state. The constant low-level panic that had maintained itself beneath conscious awareness began to ease. His body, recognizing that immediate threat had diminished, demanded the sleep it had been denied. By afternoon, Marcus was sleeping in longer blocks, 2-3 hours at a time, secure in the knowledge that his shelter wouldn't betray him during his unconsciousness. He woke from one such sleep to discover the wind had changed. It was quieter, less aggressive. The blizzard remained, but it had lost the visceral malevolence that characterized the previous 36 hours. Marcus checked outside and saw that the snow had stopped accumulating quite so rapidly. The thermometer read 60 degrees Celsius, but the constant wind that had pressed against the cabin had diminished to occasional gusts. The storm was breaking. He sat near the stove, warming his hands with a cup of hot soup, and allowed himself to truly believe that rescue would come, that he'd survive this, that the 3 days of testing had an end point. The blizzard continued through the evening and into the third night, but its fury had abated to something almost manageable. Marcus slept deeply, his body finally convinced that survival was assured. Tomorrow, or perhaps the day after, the helicopter would arrive. The documentary would be complete, the challenge overcome. But something had shifted in him. Something the cold had changed fundamentally. He would carry this experience with him always. The clarity of survival, stripped of everything non-essential. The ancient awareness that humans could endure far more than comfort suggested possible. As sleep claimed him completely, Marcus dreamed not of warmth, but of returning to this mountain again, of testing himself further, of learning what else the cold might teach. Entendido. Vou expandir os capítulos 5 e 6, mantendo a qualidade narrativa e aumentando significativamente o conteúdo. Aqui estão as versões expandidas. The fourth morning arrived with a transformation so complete, it seemed impossible only hours of time had passed. The blizzard had broken entirely. Outside the cabin's window, the world revealed itself in brilliant clarity. The sun, climbing low across the southern horizon, despite the late hour of 11 a.m., created a landscape of absolute white, rendered almost translucent by its intensity. The wind had ceased entirely, leaving behind a silence so profound it seemed to carry its own acoustic weight. Marcus emerged from the cabin into conditions that were paradoxically more dangerous than the storm, despite their apparent peacefulness. The cold without wind was deceptively lethal, exposure still lethal within minutes, but the absence of wind chill meant the actual temperature was only 60 degrees rather than the 70 degrees wind chill equivalent. He pulled his thermal suit tight and ventured a short distance from the cabin, testing his endurance against the clear day cold. His breath crystallized spectacularly, creating ice particles that hung in the air before falling. His exposed face began stinging within 30 seconds, not yet painful, but bearing the promise of pain if he remained exposed. He retreated to the cabin after 5 minutes, his face already showing the initial stages of cold-induced numbness. But in those 5 minutes, he'd seen something crucial, smoke rising from a distant valley, suggesting civilization existed beyond the mountain's isolation. The helicopter would come, possibly today or tomorrow, but it would come. Back inside, Marcus allowed himself to assess the experience with a clarity that had been impossible amid ongoing crisis. He'd entered the cabin alone, convinced in his preparation and training. He'd faced conditions that had challenged every assumption about his resilience. He'd discovered that survival mathematics were far less forgiving than theoretical models suggested. And he'd discovered something else: the human capacity to adapt, to problem solve, to endure. Finding Garrett's journal had been luck, but responding to that luck appropriately required clear thinking and sustained effort. He prepared a substantial meal, a luxury now that he knew rescue was imminent and the wood supply was adequate. He heated water for washing, scrubbing away 3 days of accumulated grime and salt from dried sweat. The sensation was luxurious beyond measure. Warm water against skin that had forgotten what genuine warmth felt like. He changed into dry clothes, hung wet items near the stove to dry, and actually felt almost human again. Marcus sat at the cabin's small table, something he hadn't done before, too focused on survival to consider sitting for non-essential purposes, and simply observed his surroundings with the perspective of someone who'd survived a genuine test. The cabin's rough wooden walls bore marks from decades of occupation. Previous residents had carved initials into the support beams. Someone had drawn a crude map of the surrounding mountains on one wall, indicating peaks and valleys with pencil marks now faded by time and temperature fluctuation. He traced the map with his finger, understanding that he was examining the accumulated history of the mountain's human inhabitants. How many people had stood in this cabin, facing the same cold, the same isolation, the same question about whether they possessed adequate resources to survive? The afternoon passed with activities that would have seemed frivolous during the crisis, but now represented recovery. He organized the cabin meticulously, neatened his sleeping area with almost obsessive attention to detail, and documented his experience in Garrett's journal alongside the old ranger's entries. Future visitors would find a record of what had transpired here. Day 1-3, survived blizzard with careful resource management and discovery of cached wood supplies. Cabin functioned as designed, human resilience adequate to challenge. Critical insight: survival is not about individual heroics, but about systematic response to available conditions. The mind must remain clear. Panic is luxury that kills faster than cold. Day 4, blizzard breaking. Wood supplies adequate. Beginning to understand that this experience will reshape how I perceive human capability and limitation. 3 days ago, I believed 60° C was incomprehensible. Now I understand it. I have lived in it. I have endured it. This knowledge changes everything about how I understand myself. He wondered if Garrett's entries were part of the cabin's appeal to the documentary crew. Did they research the mountain's history? Did they know that previous inhabitants had faced similar tests? Marcus spent hours reading through Garrett's complete journal, spanning the 15 years the ranger had maintained the cabin. The entries revealed a man gradually falling in love with the mountain's demands. Early entries were clinical, observational, weather patterns, maintenance needs, supply inventories, but later entries showed a deepening relationship with the place, an almost spiritual connection to the wilderness and the clarity it provided. One particularly poignant entry, dated February of the ranger's final year maintaining the cabin, read, "I have decided to retire from this post, not because I no longer love the mountain, but because I love it too much. I have stopped wanting to return to civilization. Each winter becomes harder to leave. I fear that if I continue, I will simply refuse to descend the mountain one season. I will choose to remain, to winter here permanently. That choice seems increasingly reasonable, increasingly right, but it would break the hearts of those who love me in the valley. So I will leave while I still possess the will to depart." Marcus closed the journal carefully, moved by Garrett's honesty. The old ranger had recognized in himself something that Marcus was only beginning to feel: the mountain's transformative power, the way it stripped away the irrelevant and revealed essential truth about human existence and human capability. By evening, Marcus was surprisingly content, despite knowing the experience was ending. The cabin that had seemed hostile 3 days ago now felt almost comfortable. More than comfortable. It felt like home, in a way that no urban dwelling had ever managed. The stove's warmth was familiar. The silence held meaning rather than hostility. He ate the remaining emergency rations deliberately, making each meal last as long as possible. He drank hot water and sat by the window, watching the darkness gradually reclaim the landscape as the sun completed its minimal arc across the southern sky. The thermometer outside read 59°. C. The cold had become something he could contextualize, could understand through experience rather than theory. He no longer feared it with the primal intensity of those first terrible hours. He respected it, maintained vigilant awareness of its lethal nature, but he no longer experienced it as incomprehensible threat. It was simply a condition that required appropriate response. Marcus prepared his final journal entry in Garrett's book. "To whoever reads this after me, the mountain tests you, but the test is fair. Resources exist if you search. Cold is specific and manageable if approached methodically. Fear is natural and useful if it drives preparation rather than paralysis. Survival is not about heroics. It's about clarity, rationing, adaptation, and the refusal to surrender. I survived because I accepted the situation and responded to it. Not because I was special, just because I was present enough to learn what needed learning. But I will be honest, I do not want to leave. The comfort of civilization feels like a betrayal of what this mountain has taught me. Yet I must return to share this knowledge, to help others understand what humans are truly capable of enduring. Perhaps I will return here someday when I have properly processed what this experience means. Marcus returned the journal to its box beneath the cot and prepared for what would be his final night in the cabin. The stove burned steadily, consuming wood from Garrett's cache. The temperature held at a genuinely comfortable level, nearly 10 degrees Celsius inside, luxury compared to the early days. He lay in his blanket cocoon, hands behind his head, listening to the silence outside. The wind had stopped entirely. The mountain was resting, recovering from its violent exertion during the blizzard. Tomorrow, civilization would reassert itself. The helicopter would descend. The documentary crew would collect him. His isolation would end. But something about the mountain would remain with Marcus forever. A clarity about human capability that casual comfort never provided. He would return to civilization knowing something fundamental about himself, that he could endure more than he'd believed possible, and that endurance itself was a form of wisdom. As he drifted towards sleep, Marcus heard something in the distance, the faint thrumming of helicopter blades, distant but real. They were coming to collect him, to extract him from the mountain. The challenge was ending. But in the darkness of the cabin, Marcus recognized a truth that would shape his future decisions. He didn't want to leave. Not because he was afraid or unprepared for civilization. He didn't want to leave because the mountain had revealed something to him about authentic living that he feared would dissolve the moment he descended into comfort and convenience. Marcus slept deeply, peacefully, and without dreams, knowing that tomorrow would bring not an ending, but a beginning of something far more significant than the documentary would ever capture. The helicopter descended through clear morning air, its blades creating patterns in the snow as it approached the cabin's clearing. Marcus stood outside, fully packed, his emergency supplies organized, his experience ready to be transformed into narrative. The cold was severe, 62 degrees Celsius according to the thermometer, but it no longer felt hostile. It simply felt like a condition to navigate, a challenge that had been met and understood. He climbed into the helicopter, removing his gloves to shake hands with the documentary crew, feeling the strange sensation of moving from absolute cold into heated interior. The pilot's voice crackled through headsets. "Welcome back, Marcus. How are you feeling?" Marcus considered the question carefully. How was he feeling? Exhausted, transformed, humbled, proud, reluctant, all of these simultaneously. "I'm ready to come home," he said finally, the words feeling like a lie even as he spoke them. "But I learned things here I'll carry forever." The helicopter lifted, and the cabin receded into the landscape. From the air, the mountain was revealed in its entirety. Vast, indifferent, beautiful in a way that demanded respect. The cabin appeared impossibly small against the wilderness surrounding it, a human structure persisting through sheer design and the accumulated knowledge of everyone who'd occupied it before. Marcus could see Garrett's name carved into a wooden board beside the cabin door. The old ranger had left his mark on the mountain, and Marcus understood now that his own survival had been built on foundations laid by others who'd endured similar tests. This realization was profound. Survival was never truly individual. It was built on accumulated human knowledge, on the experiences of those who came before, on the written records and physical caches that represented collective understanding transmitted across decades. The documentary would present the 3 days as an isolated, heroic experience. The editing would compress it into a narrative arc of challenge, struggle, and triumph. The footage would become entertainment, something to watch from comfortable rooms. But Marcus carried the reality, the desperate calculations, the fear that wasn't shown but constantly present, the moment of genuine despair when the math suggested inadequate resources, and the transformation that occurred when adaptation became necessary. He carried the memory of finding Garrett's journal, and how that discovery had shifted from technical advantage to something deeper, a connection across time with another human who'd faced identical circumstances. The helicopter reached the base camp where the documentary crew had established their operations. The transformation from mountain to civilization was jarring. Heated tents, electric lights powered by generators, comfortable chairs, hot showers. The abruptness of returning to modern convenience disoriented Marcus in ways he hadn't anticipated. As Marcus descended from the aircraft, cameras began capturing footage. The experienced survival expert, apparently unchanged by 4 days of extreme conditions, smiled for the cameras and spoke about the experience with the polished eloquence that would eventually reach audiences across the internet. "It was challenging," he said to the lead camera. "More challenging than I'd anticipated. But the cabin provided what was necessary, and the cold became something I could understand rather than something that remained mysterious and terrifying." The documentary crew nodded, satisfied. Their footage was excellent. The story would be compelling. Marcus was photogenic enough, articulate enough, and had survived dramatically enough to create engaging content. But at night, alone in his hotel room with civilization's modern comforts surrounding him, Marcus found the transition genuinely disorienting. Central heating felt excessive. Electric light seemed unnecessary. The soft bed felt wrong. His body had adapted to the cot's firmness and struggled to relax into luxury. He woke repeatedly. The silence wrong, the temperature wrong, the absence of survival requirements leaving him feeling strangely untethered. He called the documentary's producer, "I want to return." There was silence on the line. Return to what? The mountain, the cabin. "I want to go back, but for longer, a week, maybe 2. I need to understand what I learned there more completely." The producer laughed, the sound crackling through the phone. "Marcus, that's the exhaustion talking. Give yourself a week of recovery. You'll feel differently." But Marcus knew better. The mountain had changed something fundamental in him. Comfort no longer felt like the natural state. Challenge had clarified his perception of what living truly meant. The cabin's demands had stripped away everything irrelevant, leaving only the essential human exercise, responding to conditions with clarity and resourcefulness. Over the following weeks, as the documentary underwent editing, Marcus made arrangements. He would fund his own return trip. He would document it himself. He would spend an entire winter on the mountain, learning everything that Garrett's journal suggested was learnable, pushing himself beyond the initial test to genuine mastery. He researched obsessively. Cold weather survival techniques he hadn't yet implemented, advanced first aid for injuries in remote locations, advanced food preservation and rationing strategies, psychological preparation for extended isolation. He corresponded with other extreme environment survival experts, learning from their experiences, understanding what they'd discovered through years of mountain existence. Marcus left his job. He liquidated investments. He told his family that he needed time away, understanding that they wouldn't truly comprehend what he meant. He purchased specialized equipment, advanced thermal gear rated for 80 degrees Celsius, emergency medical supplies that represented every scenario he could imagine, surveying equipment to map the mountain properly, and a camera system to document his extended stay. The documentary premiered to significant viewership. The footage of Marcus's emergence from the helicopter, appearing healthy despite his ordeal, resonated with audiences. The carefully edited narrative of struggle and triumph generated millions of views across multiple platforms. internet discussion boards filled with comments about human resilience and personal transformation. Comments ranged from inspirational, "This is what real human achievement looks like. No special powers, just preparation, mental clarity, and refusal to quit," to skeptical, "This seems overly dramatic. Humans have survived way worse. Why is this presented as so remarkable?" But Marcus, watching the edited version of his experience compressed into 45 minutes, felt the complex emotion of seeing something true rendered into something simplified. The documentary wasn't false. It accurately captured certain elements, but the actual experience contained more nuance, more uncertainty, more genuine fear than the finished product suggested. More importantly, it contained something the documentary completely missed: the spiritual transformation that emerged from confronting genuine limitations and discovering capability that abstract training could never reveal. He began planning his return to the mountain with military precision. He would arrive in September, before the worst cold. He would build his skills progressively through autumn. By the time deep winter arrived, he would be prepared for conditions far worse than what he'd already survived. He researched Garrett's life. Through public records and old newspaper archives, he discovered that the ranger had indeed retired from mountain maintenance. But Garrett had never truly left. He'd established a small research station 15 kilometers from the original cabin, studying Arctic climate patterns and wildlife migration. He'd lived there for an additional 20 years before passing away at age 73. Garrett had found a way to remain on the mountain while maintaining connection to the broader human community. He'd become a climate researcher, publishing papers that contributed meaningfully to Arctic science. He'd built a life that integrated the mountain's demands with purposeful work. Marcus saw in Garrett's trajectory a possibility for his own future. He could return, he could stay. He could contribute something valuable while remaining in the place that had called to him so powerfully. In the final scene of the documentary, filmed as Marcus was leaving the base camp, he'd said something that audiences found particularly quotable. "Comfort is wonderful, but it doesn't teach you who you actually are. Challenge reveals truth. The mountain revealed that I'm more capable than comfort ever suggested, more resilient than ease could measure, more fundamentally human than civilization allows me to remember." Those words, filmed weeks earlier and spoken in the immediate aftermath of his experience, had become his documentary legacy. But they were also his commitment to himself. He would continue seeking those mountains, both literal and metaphorical, that demanded he become fully, completely present to his own existence. 3 months after the documentary premiered, Marcus boarded a plane to Anchorage. From there, he would arrange transport to the mountain. He would arrive at the cabin in late September, just as the season was turning toward the brutal cold that had transformed him 4 months earlier. But this time, he wasn't arriving as a tourist to extreme survival. He was arriving as a pilgrim, returning to a sacred place. He carried Garrett's journal in his backpack, along with research about Arctic ecosystems, equipment for conducting scientific observations, and the profound understanding that some people don't simply visit mountains, they return to them again and again, building lives around the transformative challenge they represent. The cabin waited through the seasons, maintaining its isolation. Garrett's journal sat in its wooden box beneath the cot, waiting for new entries, new documentation of humans confronting the mountain and discovering themselves through that confrontation. The mountains stretched endlessly across the Alaska Range, indifferent to human achievement or human suffering, yet deeply engaged with both. And Marcus, returned to civilization but forever changed by cold and clarity, boarded his final plane with the certain knowledge that he would descend that mountain only when circumstances forced him, and perhaps not even then. He would build his life there, contribute his knowledge there, and ultimately surrender to the mountain's demand for complete integration. The mountain had taught him that comfort and truth were often inversely proportional. He'd lived that truth for 4 days. Now he would dedicate the rest of his life to deepening that understanding, sharing that knowledge, and helping others recognize what humans were truly capable of becoming when comfortable certainty was stripped away and replaced by authentic challenge.